Jennifer.
Hi, Bob. Guess what?
Bob Bourke is the mechanic at large.
Hi, I'm Bob Bourke. Welcome to Mechanic at Large. On our show today, we're going to talk about timing belts. That's something that I've got some experience with. This came off my car and it broke about a week ago. This is the second belt that I've broken on this car, so I've got a little bit of a background knowledge on this. Cars today, there's 300 or 400 models of cars that use timing belts instead of chains now. You find them mostly on import cars and four-cylinder American cars. Older cars use timing chains, and we'll give you an example of those. Manufacturers suggest that you change your timing belt between 36 and 60,000 miles, depending on the maker. And it's a good idea to do that because if you lose a timing belt at highway speed, you've got a big and expensive problem. Let's go to our tool illustrator and draw a picture of what we used in the old days, or the current big V8s. We'll draw the crankshaft right here in the bottom of an engine and a camshaft up here. A camshaft is the thing that runs your valves. So on the bottom of the crankshaft, we have a chain in older V8 engines that comes up and runs a camshaft gear. A camshaft is a thing that's got a bunch of little lobes on it, and I'll show you one of those in a few minutes. As the camshaft turns around and this lobe comes up, it moves a little thing here called a lifter. And this is in a V8 engine. You'd have a set here and a set here. The camshaft's located right in the middle of the valley. The little lifter moves another thing called a push rod, and the push rod moves a little thing up here called a rocker, which in turn moves your valve and opens the intake and exhaust valves in your engine at the proper time. Now these chains are very rugged, very indestructible, and did for years. I'll show you one on a 350 we got in the shop here. We've got this old girl here just for demonstration purposes. We'll just take off the balancer. I've got this loosened up, and there's our cover. And there's what an old-fashioned timing chain looks like. And you can see they run on gears. Now these very, very seldom break. They don't give much trouble, and if they wear down to the point where they get really, really loose, usually the worst that'll happen is that they'll jump a gear. Your engine will go out of time, but usually jumping one gear won't cause a lot of destruction. When they do get old like this, they get very, very noisy, and that's how we know it's time to change them. Let's go back to our tool illustrator. In industrial engines, you'll find that they don't use timing chains, they'll use gears. So what we'll do is we'll have a crankshaft here, they'll put another gear on that, and another gear up here. And the reason they do this is that they gear drive this, so as the crankshaft turns that way, it sends this idler gear this way, and this one this way, and your camshaft will be hooked to there. This system operates in the same principle as this, but this is more expensive and more heavy to make. Most big diesel engines have that. So after the evolution of all these things, we got around to the point where manufacturers decided to put the camshafts up top in an engine. And when they do that, that's when we use timing belts. What we're going to look at today is a timing belt that goes up and runs an overhead cam engine. Now the advantages of overhead cams are this. We can take the lifter out of the driveline, we can take the push rod out, get rid of these two components, and in a V8, remember, you'll have 16 of these lifters and 16 of these push rods. We can take them out of the system by putting the camshaft directly driven on a belt, and we put our lifter right here to run our valve. Let me show you on the bench here a couple of these components, and you'll get an idea of what we've saved by taking out those parts. This is a little camshaft out of a four-cylinder engine. I'm just going to use it for demonstration purposes to show you. This is a lifter, and in a V8 this will follow and ride right on that lobe, and as the lobe comes up it lifts that lifter. The lifter lifts a push rod right there. The push rod rocks the little valve rocker. So this is happening about 3,000 times a minute inside your engine as you're going down the road. By getting rid of all these components, we go directly to a little system that just works right off the lobe and does the valve. We take out a whole lot of friction-making components, a lot of weight, and a lot of wear points. The overhead cams in an engine, I've got one over here, a little Ford Pinto. We'll just take that valve cover off. That's what an overhead camshaft looks like. So what we're going to do in today's show is we're going to show you how to go into the front of an engine and change that timing belt. If you've got a broken timing belt, you're going to have to get specific information to suit your car and how to put it back on. But if you've got a belt that's still in place that you're inspecting and checking to see how bad it is, we'll show you how you can change that without a whole lot of fancy or special tools. Now, one thing about timing belts. I showed you mine. There's a couple things we want to watch for. There's 2 or 3 different styles of timing belts. Basically, the differences are in the teeth. We've got some that have got a little round tooth like this. And they've got fancy names. I think this is called a curvilinear or something. And you have to be careful when you buy a timing belt that you check that it's the correct belt to go in your car. There's one that has little square teeth like this, and this is called something like a trapezoidal or similar, something along that line. But you've got to be sure that when you take a belt off your car that the new one you get matches the one that the one you're going to put back on. The place to look in a timing belt for wear is on the edges of these teeth and down in here. You may see a little bit of material lifting, or you may see these teeth starting to lift. Watch for any wear, or if you've got a rounded edge on part of your teeth, it's time to replace that belt. The other thing you have to remember is that timing belts are very sensitive. When you handle them or buy a timing belt, it'll almost always be in a box. The reason for that is they don't want these timing belts bent at anything close or a tight angle. Because if you do, you can crack the backing in them and the belt won't hold much. A timing belt, as it is, will probably hold 1,000 pounds. If you crack it and break it backwards, it'll probably break it somewhere around 150 pounds pressure. Just take a look at this one here. I'll just set it on the edge of the bench and show you what happened to mine. This happened when my car was sitting still at a service station. When I went to start it, it stripped off this amount of teeth. And you can see that those teeth were lifting off, and that timing belt shot. If I would have checked that, I would have caught that in time, and I would have saved myself a tow job and having to take that thing apart with the car dead. So that's why it's important to inspect your belt. What we're going to do today is look at 2 different engines. We've got a Ford Pinto engine. We're going to take it apart and just show you how the belt runs in that, and we've got one import engine. We'll do that when we come back.
Most repairs shown on Mechanic at Large can be accomplished by the average person. Should you feel uncomfortable attempting any repairs, you should contact a qualified mechanic or your local service station. Mechanic at Large and this television station assume no responsibility.
I love that thing. Welcome back. We're going to work on a little Ford Pinto engine today, and I want to tell you before you do this job that it's very difficult sometimes on transverse mounted engines to get to the front of the engine to replace the timing belt. You may have to take off part of an inner fender and sometimes a front tire. If your engine is mounted straight ahead, conventionally you may have to remove your radiator. But stay with us anyway and watch this show, because whether or not you can do this yourself or not, you'll know what you're paying for when you get this done at your garage. We got a little Ford Pinto engine here we're going to work on first. The first thing we have to do to change a timing belt is to set our engine on top dead center on number 1 cylinder. Now the easiest way to do that is to have a buddy turn over the engine and look at your distributor cap and find number 1 spark plug lead. Now number 1 is always the cylinder closest to the front of the engine. If you've got a crossways mounted engine, it'll be the one on the fan or on the end where your pulleys and your timing cover runs will be number 1. So trace the wire to number 1, find that, then take your cap off and turn your distributor, or turn your engine over until your rotor points to number 1. That'll mean that you're firing number 1 cylinder and you should be close to top dead center. The second thing that we do is go down to the marks on our front pulley, because we've usually got a timing mark in an engine. You can look right in here. I've marked that with a yellow crayon so you can see it. And there's a little pointer there. So you can make your fine adjustment in there. And when you've got that right on top, dead center, number 1, and your rotor pointing to number 1, disconnect your battery. Don't let anybody turn that engine over till this job's completed. Now, let's get down here and down and dirty and do some work. The first thing we've got to do is remove a lot of the hardware. You may find motor mounts and so on that are interfering in this job. This is going to be really nice because I got it on the bench. This is our water pump pulley. We'll just get rid of it, take it off. You're going to have to use a gear puller to pull the front pulley off an engine. I want to point out one thing to you right here. I've got the old pulley off the front of the 350 Chev that we keep around here. This is a vibration damper. You can see that it's got a ring of rubber in it, and you cannot pull this type of a pulley with an outside puller because you'll damage this rubber mounting. This is put into this engine to take out harmonic vibrations that can cause a crankshaft to break. Most of the smaller engines don't use that, and this is just a simple little pulley. You'll need a 3-geared puller like this, which basically will go on and yank that off for you. I've got this one all loosened up, so we're just going to take it apart the easy way. I'll just wiggle and jiggle this off. Well, that's the theory. All right, it's off. Be very careful. There's a little key right there. You'll see on the crankshaft, and that's usually straight up or straight down at top dead center. That kind of gives you a second indication you're okay. Don't lose that key, especially if you've got an import car, because it's going to be metric and hard to find. This is our timing belt cover. Let's take it off. I got to find some tools here. These are combination metric, and some are standard, some are metric. I've got these loosened up because I didn't want to take all day to get this off. Just run these off. We'll get in and have a look at our timing belt. Most of these covers are not sealed units. As you can see a little bit of the belt down here. They're not sealed, but they do have dust seals in them. I'll drop that down there. We won't need that for a while. If any oil comes out when you take something like this off, you've got a real serious problem. Take the bolts out. Okay, we're just going to slide that cover off. And there's our timing belt, just exactly like I drew it for you. Well, pretty well anyway. There's our timing belt. We can inspect the condition of this belt from here. Now, because we don't have a broken belt, and we've got our crankshaft on top dead center, look for a timing mark up here. I got to get a pointer here and a crayon. Now, if you're going to do this job on your car, you may need specific information, especially if it's been broken. But otherwise, here's the little pointer right here on this Ford Pinto. There's a little dot on this tooth right here, and a little marker there. Now, when we have this belt off, or loosened off, what we have to be very, very sure of is that the relative position of the crankshaft and the camshaft stay the same. Otherwise, when we put it back together again, it'll be out of time and can do some serious valve damage. This is the tightener. And most cars, or most of the types that I know of, have a spring-loaded tensioner in here that tensions the timing belt. Keeps pressure on there. We'll show you how to loosen that off on this car, and you've got to check it out when you do a timing belt job. Let me set those down. I need some more tools here. Got some in my pocket, some here, some there. Okay, the tightener on this engine has got a little bolt right in here, a 1/2 inch. We're going to loosen that off, and that secures the tightener. We'll just slack that off for the moment, and that will allow that little tightener to move for us. We got one bigger bolt up top here on the adjuster, right there. We're going to loosen that off, and then I'll show you how that thing flexes. Oh! All right, now our adjuster is loose, and if I can get my thumbs in there, I'll show you how that moves to keep tension on the belt. See that? Now what we have to do is hold this tensioner back out of the way while we take this belt off because it's spring-loaded. When you're doing this job, you want to go in and check the bearing in the little tensioner roller, because if it's gone bad, you'll be getting a lot of noise. Now, I got to kind of get in here if I can, around here, and what I'm going to try to do is to take some tension off this tensioner right like that, and I'm going to slip that timing belt off, and we'll take a look at it. Okay? So we're loose there. Slip the timing belt off the side. Easier said than done, Bob. There, they're coming. There. We've got our timing belt loose. Now we can inspect it the way I told you before on the board. The things to look for or problems in the teeth. If you're ever going to reuse a timing belt, you want to mark it for direction of travel. That's very critical. It should travel in the same direction as when you took it off. But for the cost of a belt, you're better to replace it every time. To put it back together, we just have to be sure our camshaft doesn't move. Route it the same way that we had it, and get it around behind this tensioner. To check this thing, just spin it. Can you hear that? That needs to be changed and should be changed because that thing's going to go around about 7 million times a minute for every minute you drive your car. To put it back together, get your belt rolled up over. Make sure, as I say, be careful with this belt. Try not to damage it in any way you can. Get your belt locked in your grooves and make sure the distance on the straight side of the belt, all right, make sure it's snug on the straight side of the belt, right there. And that sets up your timing, having this gear matching this. You've got to pull it around behind, get it around behind that adjuster, and the spring tension that's on that adjuster is proper for this engine. We'll finish this up when we come back.
It's time to take a look at some short-term maintenance tips. Bob will be back right after this.
Welcome back. I got a bit of a fly problem here today. Okay, our little Pinto engine. While we were gone, I got it all into line, got all my notches lined up, and like I say, the critical thing is to make sure that nothing moves when you reassemble it. It's back together. That tensioner on the Pinto is automatic, so all you have to do is leave it loose, it'll take up the tension on the bolt, and then snug up those two bolts to anchor it. Let's kick the old Pinto out of the way and bring up this little import engine. This is off a little Honda. We got to take the valve cover off to do this job, so that's easily done around here. Throw that down there, and we've got to remove all this little cowling and cover. Remember again to start with, set your engine on top dead center, number 1, use your rotor to find it, and on the Honda we've got a little timing mark down here in the front cover. Now, I'm going to take the pulley off, just as easy as I did on the Pinto. We've got these pre-loosened off. I actually did it myself. Remember again the little key that I mentioned to you, do not lose a metric key if you can help it or you'll be back at the dealership looking for it. Now I want to show you one unique thing on the Honda, and you may have this on a different make of car as well. The Honda has got an external adjustment for the tension on your belt, and that's these two bolts right here. So to reset the tension, if your belt's getting worn, all you have to do is loosen these two bolts off. That allows the tensioner to move over. It's spring-loaded, and it puts the proper tension on that belt, and it's adjusted. If you're going to get down to doing this for yourself, buy the book or the tape on how to do it so you'll know exactly what you're doing, but you can adjust this externally. We're going to take off this cover. You can see that this cover's in bad shape. This engine was overheated by a fellow who lost his water pump right there, and he kept on driving it until it quit. But on Mechanic at Large, we like to recycle, so we're using used engines. We got a bunch of little bolts around here. These are metric. Around there, 10 millimeters, I think. You find that so many cars these days got half metric, half standard, and it's very confusing. Good for the tool makers. Another one up here. And you'll have to take your water pump pulley off before you do this job, and probably some other of your sheet metal. I believe on the Honda Civic as well, you'll have to remove the front tire. So check your book on that and make sure you feel comfortable with doing this job. One more there. Got a lot of bolts in here. I usually use impact tools to do this, but they're too noisy to use, and you probably haven't got them at home, so we'll do it the way you're going to do it. 2 more bolts up there. Good thing I loosened these. All right. There comes that cover off. I'll set it aside. There's our top little gear, and look at this timing belt. Now this is the kind you really like to find, because when you find something that's wrecked like this, you know that you've saved a very expensive repair. There's our 2 little adjuster bolts. Let's pull this off, and look at the mess in here. This is the timing belt, and it's gone to pieces. Isn't that something? There's the little adjuster. I mentioned it to you. Here's how it works. You can see when it's loose, it's movable. It's got spring tension on it as well. So like I said, when you're outside, you can readjust this by loosening these bolts. That'll let the little idler move in to make up for any wear in the belt, and then you simply tighten them up again. Let's take this belt off. I've got a new one here. If we can get it off. This guy was very, very, very close to a major failure with that belt. That engine's been so badly overheated, this belt's about melted. The other thing to check before you put a new belt on is to check the condition of your top, upper, and lower gears. Now what you want to look for on them is any sharp place or any roundedness or dishing. Because if these start to wear out, if you travel a lot in dusty conditions, they'll actually wear little ditches in them, and your belt life or your belt life expectancy will go way, way down. What you're looking at here is just rubber, you can see. We'll get our new belt out of my fly swatting box. There it is. And we're going to put that new belt on there. Now remember, be very, very careful with this belt. You don't want to be too rough on it. I want to handle it very, very gently because it's very fragile and very expensive. Now what we have to do is loosen that idler off again to get that belt on. And I want to point out one other thing on this engine. The timing marks on this gear up top are very, very faint, but on the Honda, the timing marks align crossways. There's one on each side of that little gear. So when you set this one, this wheel will be right across. Now, as I mentioned before, you want to disconnect your battery or your starter on these cars so that you can never turn over the crankshaft. The camshaft, once you take the belt off, may have a tendency to flip forward or backward on you. And what's happening is that's because the valve springs don't want the camshaft to be where you want it to be. When you put this belt back on, you've got your crankshaft set at top dead center. If this gear moves on you at all, like that, or doesn't want to stay where you want to put it, you may have to put a screwdriver or a pry bar into the hole to move it ever so slightly when you put your belt back on. That's easy to do, but remember it's critical and it's very easy to get one notch out. There's my new belt. I'm going to put this on. Again, check your idlers. Put your belt on, let your tensioner come snug against your belt, and then tighten up your two bolts. That's how you do a Honda. I'm going to put this back together today after we leave, but this is our show on timing belts. I hope you'll pay attention and get yours checked. If you've got over 30, 40,000 miles, if you don't feel you can do this, take it to a garage and have it done. You can have a very, very, very major failure on the highway because if that belt breaks on about half the engine's made, your valves will collide with the tops of your pistons. You'll get a noise about like this, and nothing after that. Thanks for joining us. See you next time on Mechanic at Large.
For a copy of this episode of Mechanic at Large, please send your check or money order for $24.95 plus $5 shipping and handling and any applicable taxes to the address on your screen. Or call 1-800-843-3658 and have your Visa, MasterCard, or American Express ready. Please specify the program topic you want and allow 2 weeks for delivery.